With the movie as massive of scale as Avengers Endgame, there's no denying that during the production of this film, some scenes don't make it further than the cutting room floor. But every once in a while, we get a really cool in-depth behind-the-scenes look when deleted scenes are released. But it always leaves us wondering, what if these scenes were included in the movie, and would it have made the final release of the film any better? Well, today we're looking at the best deleted scenes from Avengers Endgame that make us wish made it into the final cut. Let's go ahead and take a look.
Agent Romanoff, you miss me?
Oh yeah, Charles, we got ourselves an X-Men fan.
Captain.
Your Highness.
Captain, big fan, Spider-Man. Hey everyone.
One of the saddest moments of Avengers Endgame definitely comes from the interaction between Black Widow and Hawkeye, where they have to decide who will sacrifice themselves to obtain the Soul Stone to possibly save humanity that was lost 5 years earlier. And while this scene is very devastating in the final release of the film, apparently an entire alternate version of this film was produced, and it took a completely different approach to the sacrificial storytelling that was so important in this story and weaved it into a horrific scene. In the recently leaked deleted scene, we see an alternate version of this scene where instead of Black Widow and Hawkeye having to choose for themselves what they're going to do, we instead see a variation where they're attacked by Thanos and his army and essentially are completely overrun. Even seeing Natasha get shot through the chest with an enemy weapon, it's only until they're completely overrun that Natasha decides to throw herself over the cliff to transport Hawkeye away and save his life by giving him the Soul Stone. This version of the scene is much more heartbreaking, as it feels like it was a situation they were cornered into rather than being able to make the decision on their own, but it still would have been very interesting to see play out. Alternatively, there was also a leaked deleted scene that we have known about kind of existing for a while, but it wasn't officially leaked out there until more recently. But this scene apparently was supposed to take place right after Tony Stark's snap of the finger, and essentially it would put him in a realm very similar to what we saw from Thanos in Avengers Infinity War, where he would have been able to see his daughter grown up and have a conversation with her, with his daughter being played by Catherine Langford. This scene is really heartfelt, and it definitely gives some closure to Tony Stark's character, knowing that the decision that he made was in fact the right decision, and he still didn't regret it, knowing the ultimatum as to what was coming next for him. But ultimately, it seems like this scene got scrapped somewhere towards the end of production, as they chose to abandon it in favor of keeping the pacing slightly faster. And also, some of the lines kind of came off as a little bit awkward at times, and maybe they just chose to scrap it altogether. Next, we have this leaked deleted scene, which shows the Avengers team trying to make another run with the gauntlet. However, they have a little bit more dialogue between the characters trying to come up with a plan to get to the van and trying to locate the van, which has the portal inside of it. This was another scene that was probably cut for pacing issues. However, it was really cool to see all of these characters kind of devise a plan in the midst of a huge battle, and would have been kind of cool to see play out in the final release. From the scene, we see a lot of different characters talking, giving their input, and we really get to see this kind of interesting dynamic and perspective here, and we really appreciated kind of seeing just what maybe happened in the story that just didn't make it into the theatrical release. And it's really cool to kind of just see the insight as to some of the earlier stages and planning for what became one of the most epic battles in the MCU and in film altogether. And it was really a interesting perspective that we appreciate. Next, we can look to a scene that was also cut out of the film, but was included in the theatrical re-release of Endgame towards the end of its theatrical run. If you guys remember back, they said they were going to re-release Avengers Endgame and add a couple of bonus features, and one of the bonus features was actually the Incredible Hulk in an early CGI render, where we would have seen a little bit more of this character prior to what we did see in Avengers, where we see him saving people in his new form, which is, I guess, Smart Hulk. It would have been really interesting to get a little bit more of the Incredible Hulk and Bruce Banner, and it is cool that they released this as a bonus scene at the end of Avengers Endgame, but it would also be really awesome if we were able to see a variation of this that was fully rendered and completed rather than just this early CG'd version of them. But obviously, if they're not planning on putting the scene in the final release, there's no real point for them to put the budget into rendering out the whole thing. Next, we can look back to the scene that we looked at just a little bit ago where we saw everyone making a plan, and we actually get a variation of a scene that did make it into the movie. However, this one is slightly different. In the actual movie, we do see the Wasp kind of only have one real line in the whole fight scene where she refers to Captain America as Cap, which was a reference to Ant-Man and the Wasp 2, where they kind of made a joke about the Ant-Man calling him Cap, and we get that reference in the final release. However, in the extended version of this scene and this version, we kind of get a little acknowledgement that that inside joke or that reference is there, and we see Ant-Man kind of make a joke to the Wasp, which is really kind of clever and funny, and we do really like this variation as well, especially because it kind of gave the Wasp a little bit more to do in this scene rather than what actually we got to see in Endgame, but it was cool nonetheless. Another really interesting scene takes us to the rooftops with Bruce Banner and the Ancient One, and while they have a very important conversation which helps kind of shed light to the audience as to what's going on with the timeline and how the timeline works and what the rules are, we also have a line saying that death is not reversible, which essentially underlines the fact that Gamora is gone for good, or at least the Gamora from the main timeline, and later on that Black Widow would be gone for good, and that's why she wasn't able to be brought back. However, they chose to probably leave this line out because it does cause a little bit of conflict when you look into the things we know so far about the Infinity Stones, because if you remember from Doctor Strange, he was able to reverse Wong's death, and also if you look to Thanos, he was able to kind of somewhat reverse Vision's death, even though he might not be as sentient as a human. It's a little questionable, and it causes more loopholes or questionable plot holes that we're not too sure about, so that's probably why they cut that line out rather than leaving it in. But it's interesting to see kind of a little more detail as to what was planned for this scene. Next, we can look to the very popular scene from the actual final battle after Tony Stark does the snap, where all of the characters take a knee to pay respect to this character, and we also see Gamora leave. But this scene was really important because it kind of shows the legacy of the MCU that stems from Tony Stark as a character that started it all. And while we suspect they cut the scene out for pacing and kind of because there's a lot of similarities between this scene and the actual funeral scene that we get next, it is still cool to see all of these characters in their suits in this sequence kind of taking a knee to honor this character that honestly made the ultimate sacrifice for this scene. Next, we can look to this funny scene where we learn a little bit of Rocket interacting with the Avengers, which kind of is the place that he groups up with after him losing his entire team. He stays in contact with the Avengers, which is somewhat noble to say the least, but also it's really interesting how this character kind of asks about the battle in New York and how long it took, and he just completely doesn't take it seriously. He starts making fun of them for taking so long to fight the Chitauri enemies because they're kind of a joke to interstellar beings like the Guardians of the Galaxy. Just a clever line. It's a shame this one didn't make it in because it's actually pretty funny, but at the end of the day, they cut it probably not to undermine how awesome the New York scenes were. And then finally, we have this extended scene between Rocket and Thor when they go to Asgard back in time, and we just get a little bit more dialogue between these two characters, and it's just a little bit clever and just kind of an interesting sequence that they cut out of the final film. It's nothing that was necessarily too important, but we would have really liked to see this scene as well. But now it's time we turn this around to you guys, and we would love your opinion in the comments down below. Which scenes were your favorite and which ones do you think absolutely needed to be in the film and we missed out for not having it in the final release. We kind of tried to base these off of our favorites to the most important, all the way kind of going down to what could be a give or take in the final release, but we really loved some of those scenes and we thought that they were so awesome to get to at least see after the fact and after the film has released. So we're still appreciative of that, but we'd love to hear your guys' feedback. For more videos like this, be sure to subscribe with notifications on and leave a comment down below with your response to that question. And we'll see you all next time with a brand new video. Bye guys.
Talking.
I'm about to.
Hi, everybody.
Hey everybody, how you doing?
Hi.
Mwah, mwah, mwah. See you guys.
Know anybody?